Okay, so it's Cat Stanley, Space Demon, coming at you again. And today I want to talk about Kiss frontman Paul Stanley and why he is not a fan of punk legend Iggy Pop. Okay, so today I want to go back with all y'all to December of 1973. Hall of Fame rock legends Kiss had just finished recording their first album for Casablanca Records, which wouldn't be released until February 8th of the following year. Now they're set to play a show on New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1973, at the 4,800-seat Academy of Music. They're set to be the opening act on a 4-act bill, which includes the band Teenage Lust, Iggy and the Stooges, and Blue Oyster Cult. Now, Iggy and the Stooges were there supporting their third album, Raw Power, which was the first under their new moniker, Iggy and the Stooges. Previously, they had just been known as the Stooges. That record came out in February of 73, along with the bands Teenage Lust, of course, Kiss, and Blue Oyster Cult. Now, Blue Oyster Cult lead vocalist and guitarist Eric Bloom actually said that Kiss was not originally on the bill. I was told by our management that a new band had been shoved in as an opener at the last minute. So Kiss were last minute additions to this bill that included those other three groups. Some fun facts about that New Year's Eve show, 1973. That was the night Peter Criss said this: "The first time I really felt like a star was at that Academy of Music show. They always called me the complainer. I was going, I don't know if we're gonna make it. We ain't going nowhere." And that night, Peter Criss was feeling really bummed out, and that was the night Peter Criss says that Gene and Paul had rented the stretch Mercedes limousine to take the band to the venue to help cheer Peter up, because apparently he had recently just lost out. He had auditioned for the New York Dolls and lost out to his good friend Jerry Nolan for the drummer position in that band, and he was pretty bummed out. But it's interesting because Peter says it was before that Academy of Music show. Paul and Gene have said that they rented that limo for an earlier show that they did at the Diplomat Hotel. So, you know, memories fade, whatever, over the years. But anyways, that same night, another fact, Paul Stanley, one of the shows, he wore his bandit makeup. The makeup design he switched to for a couple shows at the behest of Casablanca's Neil Bogart, who felt that his Star Child design was a bit too flamboyant. Didn't want people to think he was homosexual. So Paul, being the good sport he is, changed the makeup design for a couple shows. Of course, went back to the Star Child later on. And also that night, Gene Simmons' hair caught fire during his fire breathing routine. And luckily, Sean Delaney was there with a wet towel to put it out. But yeah, it was a pretty big event. A lot of big names were at the show. Future Ramone, Dee Dee Ramone, of course, who would go on to become the bass player in seminal punk band The Ramones, was at the show. He had this to say: "Everybody there must have been a Stooges fan, and Kiss took over the whole night. Nobody could believe what they were seeing. They had 10 Marshall stacks on each side. It was a real show." Todd Rundgren, of course, singer, songwriter, producer, was there as well. He had this to say: "When I saw Kiss that night, I didn't think this is revolutionary or this is going to be the biggest thing ever. I remember thinking they didn't play very well, which is probably why they had to wear makeup." So Rundgren didn't think Kiss were the most proficient musicians, probably regarded the makeup as something of a gimmick to get them over in spite of their lack of musicianship, in his opinion. But as far as the Stooges' impressions of Kiss, Stooges drummer Scott Ashton had this to say. He said, "No one ever heard of Kiss. I thought, wow, this band is totally different. Where Iggy could be outrageous on stage, it was nothing compared to Kiss. They were pure entertainment. The crowd was digging it, but there was also an element of, what the hell is this?" And Iggy Pop, of course, lead vocalist for the Stooges, said this. He said, "I saw Kiss come out on stage and from above them lowered the most effing-normous neon light bulb adorned sign that said Kiss. I thought, Jesus effing Christ, these guys have got some dough behind them. It did look cool in a crude and very vulgar way. It was the largest piece of production I have ever seen used by a third bill act. Actually, I think Kiss were actually a fourth bill that night. In a rundown theater in my entire career. It obviously worked for them." So now let's get Paul Stanley's take on Iggy and the Stooges. Here's what the Star Child had to say in his 2014 memoir, Face the Music. "When it was time for the Stooges to play, the band took the stage and started playing. Without Iggy. Crew members had to carry Iggy down a flight of steps, drag him to the side of the stage, prop him up behind the curtains dangling there beside the stage, and then basically throw him out on stage. Iggy could barely stand up, much less walk or jump. I suddenly realized why he did all those crazy contortions. Despite the hype and legend, I thought the Stooges were awful." So Paul Stanley making his disdain for Iggy and the Stooges known, basically calling Iggy Pop out for being a wasteoid back in the day. And, you can write this off as typical Paul Stanley bullshit. Bitter, angry Paul Stanley, competitive Paul Stanley. But, in fact, a guy by the name of Duncan Hannah, who was a bit of a hang-around in the New York City music scene back at that time. He was also an actor and a painter, and he would go on to become president of the fan club for the band Television, of all things. But he would corroborate what Paul Stanley had to say about Iggy Pop that night, as quoted in the 1996 book, Please Kill Me, The Uncensored Oral History of Punk. He had this to say, "On New Year's Eve of 1973, I went to see Kiss and Iggy and the Stooges at the Academy of Music. Iggy was stoked. He was bouncing off the ceiling. He was in perfect form. He looked great, and the Stooges were looking deadly. Just severe. I was thinking, oh, this is gonna be so good. Finally, the band comes out, but no Iggy. We're thinking, God, where is he? He was ready to go. Then he comes on stage, and he was just a complete effing mess. Somehow, in like 15 minutes, he'd gone from perfection to, I don't know what he did. It was like he shot 2 quarts of vodka or something. He comes out and he barfs all over everything. He falls off the stage. He can't remember any of the lyrics. The band starts a song. They stop. They start. They stop. They're mad as hell, but Iggy just can't stand up. He just doesn't know what's going on. So this guy corroborates to a T what Paul Stanley had to say about Iggy Pop that night at the Academy of Music. Paul Stanley, not a fan of Iggy Pop, who was obviously very wasted that night. According to this Duncan Hannah guy, barfed all over the stage. But, it's kind of cool to look back, read about those old days. Obviously, myself, I was born in 75, so I wasn't born. I didn't have an opportunity to see or experience all this stuff that was going on back then firsthand, the New York City music scene. But it's kind of cool to think about, they talk about punk rock. Now, Kiss probably back then, and in retrospect, would never be associated with the punk rock movement. But the fact that you had seminal punk groups like the New York Dolls, Iggy and the Stooges, who were around then, and you think about the overlap between the musical genres, you know, a group like Kiss, who were kind of on the fringe of glam and glitter rock, and then you had these seminal punk bands. They're doing shows together, and of course, back then, nobody had any idea about all these branches of the musical evolutionary tree that would spring out, and in historical retrospect, how historical these billings and these shows were. It really is kind of cool, you know, and here's a guy who was the president of the television fan club pontificating about this show with Kiss and all this stuff, man. It had to be way cool, man. And any of you out there who were around back then, who are old enough to remember, or maybe experience this firsthand, I'd love to hear your memories of those times back in New York City, man. Just a hell of a lot of cool stuff going on back then. But that's the video. The story of Paul Stanley is not a fan of Iggy and the Stooges. In fact, he thought they were bloody awful. That's the video. I hope you dug it, and we'll see you next time.
This year.